Welcome, everyone, to the Power of Integrity podcast, where leadership aligns with principles. I'm Ralph Adamo, your host, and I'm delighted to have our guest, Richard Reid. In full disclosure, Rich and his wife, Diane, are clients of the firm. They have been for, my gosh, I think probably 15 years now. So we've enjoyed a wonderful journey together, and we continue to have that journey. I'm delighted to have Rich on. Rich is a retired managing director from First Bank. He has a beautiful pedigree of a banking history. He can tell you a little bit about it. And so I'd like to hand it over to Rich to tell us a little bit of your story and your journey up to date.
Thanks, Ralph, and I do appreciate this. This should be fun. I'll give you a little chronology, just a few minutes. One is I grew up in Orange County, local high school, played sports, learned a lot about teamwork and values and integrity and all those good things. So probably as we talk, that sports theme might kind of move through when we get into leadership. So I went to a small school up in Los Angeles, USC, worked myself through that, borrowed money throughout, worked part-time jobs throughout. Sounds like a little bit arduous. It really wasn't, because tuition in those days were, I think it was about $5,000 a year, and you had like 10 years to pay it off at 3% or something. So it was easy. Got into banking thanks to, actually, in the early 70s, we were actually in a recession, and banks were laying off, and I was very lucky to get hired into as a credit analyst trainee, starting salary of $610 a month. And it was in a training program that taught commercial lending to businesses. It was an 18-month program. As we proceed, I'll tell you later on, if 4 or 5 years later, they asked me to come back and run that training program. So I do have sort of a pedigree of love for coaching and that kind of thing. So anyway, I went through what you would expect in that career path, and that is, as an analyst, you learn the numbers, you learn how to analyze things and understand cash flows and a business's ability to repay. Then you get placed as a junior person on a line. In a line function, you're typically backing somebody up, to, carrying their suitcase and doing the analysis for them. And then eventually, as you've got it pretty much down in terms of the fundamentals of lending, then they turn you loose and say, now go find some business and get out there and sell. So that's kind of how we progressed. My first job actually on the line was with a pretty good sized bank, Bank of the West, and we started their first office in Orange County, still there in MacArthur Boulevard. It was a total startup, so that was kind of a shocking thing for me. We didn't have computers and databases, and I think we just started with Yellow Pages, started calling on people. So started that way. Moved up, changed banks, worked for a couple of larger banks, Union Bank, Wells Fargo Bank. Eventually became a team leader at Union Bank. Actually took over a portfolio that was probably one of the worst portfolios in the bank, but it was a great process for me to learn about things like character and issues and strategies and things that don't work eventually. I guess maybe that's how I was hired. They thought I was the cleanup guy or something. I'm not sure, but probably worked for 6 or 7 banks, worked for a small bank, SunWest, and then ended my career 17 years with First Bank. Started as running their commercial office in Orange County, and then expanded where I had several offices from San Diego to Woodland Hills. My role there basically was to manage managers, but I was also very much in the field. I was involved in the sales process, we would call on companies, and just to give you a little insight, the commercial lending business is extreme. I mean, it's a jungle out there. It's extremely competitive. The sales process can take years. Good companies have banks. So usually trying to position yourself for something to happen either with their bank or a deal or some kind of an event that gives you away. And then after you're in, once you've gotten the opportunity to bid on a new piece of business, there's 3 or 4 competing banks in there going against you. So, and we never really sold price, kind of like your company, Ralph. We've always sold service and really the ability to understand the business and where you're headed and your strategic plan and vision and so forth. So what happens, and since we're going to talk about integrity, I'll just kind of move to this, is that what happens with lenders is that they have a dual role, and it can be compromising. One is make sure that you do the smart thing, and that you do very good underwriting on the front end, and that you are managing the work begins actually after you make the loan, is the management of risk, because there's going to be things happen. No business goes straight up with no problems, so there's always going to be issues. So with the lending personnel, you've got the issue of risk management, but you also have the ability to be compromised because of the sales process. You know, these people are paid well. They have base salaries, but they have desire to make bonuses. And bonuses are not made just by managing an existing portfolio and sitting on a portfolio and servicing that portfolio. They're paid bonuses based on new business. So that's where it kind of things can get compromised. The process on the underwriting side is significant. It's not just the business's financials, it's the competitive analysis, it's the environment, it could be regulatory challenges they have. It could be all kinds of things that you gotta, there's no crystal ball that says, check this, and this, and then make the loan. So a lender is making a number of interviews. They're talking to management. They're doing due diligence outside. They may be talking to clients or vendors of the borrower. And then they've got to paint a story. And the story is both a written story, which kind of almost reads like a book sometimes, and then a verbal story. And that verbal story usually is getting me involved in the front end. If I don't like the story, I might get out there and help them do more, get a better understanding of the business. So there's this whole process to get it through me, number one. And then once I've signed off, then it's usually one other person. So our target market was businesses like between 20 and 200 million in revenue. Throughout my career, it was kind of the same. The loan commitment sizes were anywhere from $3 to $50 million, probably an average of 10 over that period of time. So it's a demanding business, but I'll tell you, I'm so lucky to be in that business. I have been in that business. I've been with hundreds of companies, great leaders, great strategists, people that know how to make changes and react to challenges. And a lot of the things that I took as a leader in my own business as I'm running teams and other officers. So it gives you kind of a good idea of kind of where I came from. I think teamwork was always a big issue. Integrity is, and I'll tell you one thing is that one thing I did that I'm very proud of is about 7 or 8 years ago, the bank decided they brought in a new CEO. We're headquartered in St. Louis. It's a privately owned bank, owned by the same family since 1905, I think it was. And so they brought leaders around the bank to create a strategic plan, okay? I was lucky enough to be part of the group, and the part that we worked on was kind of the top of the pyramid in terms of the strategic plan, and that was the bank's vision statement, values, mission statement. And when you look at all this and you look at it in one page, and I went into their website today and it's all still there. And won't talk too much about the vision and mission, but on the values, that was pretty fascinating because they put us in a room and they said, look at, here's about 2 pages of values. And these are things that we really believe that are most important as we hire people, as we deal with our customers and our vendors. And these are the kind of values, and you guys picked 6 or 7 of these values that you believe are most critical to making our long-term vision of the bank. Okay. And the idea was it was a 5-year vision. Okay. So we got in a room and we actually kind of voted on things because there were so many values to choose from. So we go in there and we say, well, pick this one, and then Reid, you pick 5, and Sally, you pick 5, and so forth. And we kind of tallied it up. Anyway, the bottom line, as it turns out, for this podcast is that integrity was voted the very number 1 value, and by far. And when you really think about it, the other values are kind of get integrated in it and are important, but without integrity, nothing else works. Okay. It might work in the short term, but nothing else works. And one of the things that I contributed, well, everybody had integrity, but I got my vote in on courage because I really believe that those two are very integrated. Some of the examples we can talk about is that when things are not going so well, you've got to have a lot of courage to be ethical. You can't take the short route. So I'll read you some. I wrote them down here: integrity, courage, teamwork was really important to us, purpose, people, and diversity. And you go to the website and you'll see those. And the idea too was not just hiring, but we were going to hold ourselves accountable for that. Even our own bosses accountable for that, which kind of took courage at times. So anyway, that's where I came from. In the borrowing, in the lending business, we have something, everybody gets trained on the 5 C's of credit. And the first C is character. And and when you look at definitions, there's not much difference between character and integrity. It's doing the right thing, living up to your commitments, not cheating, lying, conning people, that good stuff. So that's kind of a start. I know that's a good start for you where I'm coming from. But
Perfect start. Yeah, perfect start. Now, you did not talk much about what you're doing today in the nonprofit
oh,
philanthropic arena. You might as well share it
yeah,
on because that's got you pretty excited and propelled, and you're mastering retirement and
yeah.
retirement.
Well, I tried a few different things that I enjoyed, and I think I've kind of locked into one that I'm really spending a lot of time. I'm on the board of something called Robin's Nest. It's a nonprofit organization. We get our students that we work with, and these are students that are at risk. They're at risk in terms, and it's not a drug rehab program. It's at risk because they essentially have no parents. They don't have any support at home. I've worked with kids directly who have parents that are in jail or they're on drugs, and there's a certain percentage of the population out there that are kids that just are so unfortunate because their parents are not their support. So we really kind of replace their parents. We provide housing, food, living skills. I taught budgeting to the group, that kind of thing, but all kinds of things that these kids really need that they don't get at home. And really the goal is to get them through high school into at least a junior college and be self-sufficient, both with their lifestyle, with their money, just to be a great person. So it's a fabulous. It's been around 10 years. We're going to have, as you know, our 10th year anniversary coming up, and a gal that started by the name of Robin Wood by taking in a person, a kid that her daughter knew at the high school that was having problems. You see these kids and you kind of visually see it because of the clothes they're wearing, the way they look. They're not happy, and so we get our referrals from the counselors at these high schools that work with these kids and say, hey, this kid really has a problem. So it's a great organization. I joined the board last year on 3 different committees. Finance committee. I guess I'll be the treasurer here soon. On the fundraising committee and on a strategic planning committee. And strategic planning thing is probably the most excited I am because I really believe for any business, you've got to have a plan. My dad taught me that. He was in the construction business. He used to say, I spend my real work planning a job. He did home additions and remodels and planning the material and the labor and the timing and how it all pulls together. And then once you get on the job, it's just fun and games. That's the easy part of it. But you got to get the plan right. And you got to have everybody marching in the same direction. So,
yes, absolutely.
So, excited about this Robin's Nest thing. Thanks for bringing that up.
No, absolutely. You're doing good work here in Orange County with our community and helping those children course correct, hopefully, and change the trajectory of their lives. We have that saying, changing outcomes, impacting lives, and that's what you're doing at Robin's Nest for sure.
It's so fulfilling. It's like you go from a job that I had 12, 13 hours a day, fast pace and so forth. And it's all about, I guess, making money. It's making money for your clients, making sure they're achieving their goals and so forth, to now just able to give back. And it's some of the things I've seen, some of the successes, just, I'll share with you one quick one. I don't know how we're doing on time, but
we're doing fine. Yeah. In fact, I was going to ask you, I was going to go off script of the kind of questions that I normally ask. And actually, could you tell our audience, because you and I talked offline about this, about some of the successes that your clients and customers achieved because of the integrity that you had in that long-term relationship and what they went on to do and what they accomplished? Because there were a lot of wins in your book.
Oh yeah, there's large number when you're in this business 45 years and you deal with hundreds of companies. There's a lot of successes, a lot of companies that kind of didn't have overwhelming success, but they had enough success to create great value for the family and retirement and so forth. And then you think about the really huge wins, and I guess I'll talk about a huge win and then kind of a modest win. One is we got involved with this company. We were lucky to get involved. Their bank was taking a lot of time, wasn't moving as fast as they would like. Very well-run business in an acquisition mode. The owner, 100% owner, desired to acquire similar businesses in his space. And so I think the test going in was, could we do the financing for this latest deal, plus handle the lines of credit and so forth for the existing business. Anyway, I think it turned out to be 3, although we financed 3 acquisitions for him, but we looked at tons of them. And I'll tell you, the owner, one of the great things about him is that he was transparent. He had high integrity, but he used his trusted advisors. He used us up, whether it was the bank. I don't know how many, you look at a lot of deals and you do a lot of work for months, and then he decides to pass. It's like, what? But he was fairly conservative. But as conservative as he was, um, he we did close some businesses, and I would say that when we got into banking him, I think his company might have been worth 25 million or so. Not small bucks. And about 6 years later, he made the decision to sell the whole group and sold it for $175 million cash. So, and he had a lot of things that he wanted to do for the community. And he had a son that was born with some disease and he wanted to spend more time with that. So, fairly young guy. I want to say he was probably 55 or so.
Oh, wow.
So, sold for a lot of cash, made us feel good because we were working hard, trying to figure out ways and solutions, be creative, because he certainly challenged us on that. And it all worked out well at the end.
Yeah, seven times, seven multiple from 25 million, 175 million. That's big in 6 years.
So since I knew you were going to ask these kinds of questions, I was thinking, I went sorted through so many different types of cases. And there's one, because of the integrity theme, I want to talk about. And this is a company, two owners, cousins, it turned out, Orange County company in the manufacturing business, was doing well up until 2008. And as we know, that was certainly the greatest recession of our time. And he was in an industry, without saying his name and so forth, that sold to developers, single family homes, basically. The product that's essential in your home. So, and what happened is, for anybody, all those related industries, all those related companies to the real estate, construction industry got murdered. We were big in the nursery business in my portfolio, and those guys got killed. There just essentially wasn't any business. So here's a guy, and I've seen it a number of times in workouts, where the bank is at risk, certainly. The trade suppliers are way more risk because they're unsecured. They've been selling them this and that on terms of 30 or 60 days. And to run their own businesses, they've got to be paid. So a lot of times what I've seen is people give up when things go wrong, and they just soon file bankruptcy. And that gets them, a deal with their trade creditors, and I've seen as much as 90% loss with their trade creditors. And at times the bank will take a loss too. So, but these guys, talking about integrity, and this is a story I heard, and I didn't bank them at the time, but we banked them after this occurred, is they sold their homes. They both lived in like little studio apartments. They pared down their overhead. They got out of their lease in their big manufacturing facility. And they kept the business alive in a very small way, but kept the vision that thought, we can come back. But nobody got hurt. Their bank did not get hurt. This is something we can easily check out. Their suppliers didn't get hurt. And, they had to sacrifice real money, their homes, with kids, to live in tiny little places. And the success is that as things turned around, and I think they did learn some lessons that they could have avoided, but I'm not sure anybody could have avoided that kind of recession. Yeah. Now the business is thriving. And when we got into the opportunity to bid on it, we got the business, things were going pretty darn well. So it was easy for us at the time. And I'm sure they're doing very well now. But those are guys that stepped up, put their money where their mouth was, and I think that because they thought long term, I can give you stories of some bad ones that are not thinking long term. Long term with, say, the banks and suppliers, who's going to want to supply you and bank you when you come back in business when you burned them? you know.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
I know sometimes there's no way around having to liquidate and having your suppliers or bank take a loss. But there's those gray areas where you got to make a choice.
Yeah.
Keep all my friends and suppliers and bankers in the game for when I come out of that bad happening and I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah.
So one
Yeah.
of the great stories for me.
Yeah. There were the wins. Turn it on its head. There had to be a time when the counterparty or the parties you were working with lacked integrity, and how that turned out. I'm sure it was probably a disaster or two that, as much as you try
Yeah,
to avoid it. And,
yeah. Well, it's either in two categories. It's either people get desperate, when the ethics start to decline, people are either desperate or greedy. I had an example where a perfectly fine business that um, I went over to a small bank. It was the number two person at this small bank called SunWest Bank, and I wasn't directly involved with this when the loan was originally brought, but the business was doing well. They were in the aerospace business, and this is a little story of greed. It's what they decided to do is frankly fraud the bank, and so their business was making something and servicing big aerospace companies like Boeing and Lockheed. They decided, and their timing was horrible because it was the early 90s, and you might recall there was another real estate recession at that time. They decided that they were going to get in the spec home building business, but didn't tell us. And they decided to use the bank's credit facility to fund that without telling us. And basically, the way they did it, not to get into a big thing about accounting, but basically, things got to be balanced on the P&L and balance sheet. So if they use the line of credit on one side, where is the asset? And the asset was a phonied up accounts receivable, a trade receivable. It was a receivable that they said it was due from Lockheed, and it was actually a receivable from a related company that was out building spec homes. So the problem with the spec home business in the early 90s, they spent millions of dollars of our money and then couldn't sell the houses because the real estate market really took a dip. Rates went up, and the whole typical real estate cycle that I've seen for 3 or 4 years. I mean, 30 or 40 years, I should say. So we caught it. We could see there was a cash flow issue. Becomes evident. I think they were so short-sighted because they don't understand that we really do understand cash flow, and we have your checking account, and we can see what's going out of there. And it was a pretty simple. We hired a forensic auditor, and basically what we could see is them writing checks to like a plumber, an electrician, somebody who does concrete work. All these things were outside of their normal business. They weren't in that business. So we confronted them. Another bad ethical thing. The owner originally, when I met with him with the account officers, he suggested he didn't know anything about it. Then as we walked him through it, then he blamed the CFO, and you know that he was engaged in it. It was so that's one of the most and then now they're out of business. We want our money back. We're making demand. Nobody wants to fund them. Bankers know bankers, and there's an easy way to do diligence, and we share a lot of information. So for your audience, don't try to put things on lenders. I mean, they will finally catch it. It might take a while, but so they're out of business, and a business that was doing reasonably well for their families. I don't know what happened to them. I'm not sure I care at this point. But,
yeah.
There's that kind of thing. There's that greed, and then also there's I don't know how we're doing on timing, but I can talk about one that's out of desperation.
Yeah, if you could quickly touch on that because it might be informative to our audience. Sure.
Yeah, I think, again, things go wrong. People become desperate. And rather than do what I said that one of the successful clients did, they basically stole, well, how should I say it? I went to a company for a short period of time as a CEO and CFO. Okay. What he was doing that I didn't know is he took millions of dollars in deposits. The business was not profitable, even though they had a CPA that was on the take saying it was profitable. That's what I thought, that they were unprofitable. They were not profitable. Once I dug in and look at their real margins of what they were making, they weren't making nearly enough at the gross profit margin to come close to carrying their overhead.
Wow.
So basically what he took is millions of dollars in deposits from international clients to build these things. And years went by and that money was never used for that purpose. In fact, it was used to fund operations and to fund little projects outside of the normal business that I didn't know about. So, you know, now he went bankrupt. You'll never see him again. Who knows where he's at now? But, he wouldn't face his ego. And there's a lot of ego when you're dealing with entrepreneurs. Wouldn't face up to the fact that he needed to make adjustments, whether it's pricing or costs or how many family members he had on the payroll. He just wasn't willing to make those adjustments
Yeah.
and rather to con people out of money. So, I mean, again, you live in the banking business, you see enough of these. Again, that was my one foray out of the banking business for a short period of time. So I saw it firsthand. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Absolutely. Firsthand.
great, great learning lessons. I saw the consequences of those things, and it wasn't just the business. It was marriages. It was drugs. And one time it was a suicide, unfortunately. I feel bad about that. So things, you don't feel good about yourself, you know. There's a thing, I listened to a speech a long time ago, and I forget who it was by, but he was saying that people that don't have integrity, they don't want to hang out with other people that don't have integrity. And then the people that do have integrity, they don't want to hang out with them. So they're very lonely type of characters. They're having to live with what they've done.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And living in the shadows, isolated, because who wants to be around someone that they can't trust? Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny that con men don't want to hang out with other hot con men. It's just like, I didn't register, but
Yeah. Very
a lonely group.
Yeah. Well, we spent some 33 and a half minutes together already. And as we're rounding the
Okay.
corner here, you've shared with our audience a lot of great detail, very instructional information for many of our listeners. I would ask you if you could, in a couple minutes, maybe summarize what are some of the things our younger audience would want to know in terms of the tips or insights that help propel your career for 45 years to the success you met with in banking. What are some of those things you remember and would, or now would say, I, what I'm glad I emphasized those, and I wish I emphasized these things as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things a lot of things when you talk about leadership. But I think again, I go back to plan, have a vision, involve your staff in creating that vision. Involve your staff in creating the strategies and the action plans that go around those. Get them to buy into those things. Make them feel like real partners in the business and not just employees. And I think then you'll find that they're going to be extremely motivated. I'd say also transparency wise, I've dealt with businesses that don't want to share a lot with their employees, but I think the great ones share everything. They're totally transparent, and it's because they know that those key staff members, or for that matter, any employee, are extremely important in their role, and that staff member understands their role in meeting the vision and accomplishing the strategies. So, and then have the courage and to have great ethics, do what you say you're going to do, and hold people accountable. That's sometimes not the funnest thing, but I think it's also, people do appreciate accountability. I learned that way back in high school basketball, and it was rough at times being accountable and putting the work in. But and forget about the damn politics of things. Say what you mean, do what's right, and if it's going to hurt somebody else's feelings, so be it a little bit, as long as it's righteous and it's the right thing. And I think then you'll have the makings, at least to start, if you got a good business, of a very motivated crew of staff that really want to help. And as you grow, as the business grows, they're going to grow. It's going to be a win-win situation.
Yeah, when the team is pulling the sled in the same direction, that really does propel it far faster, far further too. Yes.
Yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rich, we've enjoyed this 35 minutes plus together. I know that someone out there in the audience is going to want to get in touch with you. If they need to reach out or want to reach out, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you as we close up here?
Well, my email address is Rich Reid. Reid is REID 25@yahoo.com. And call me if you like. I'm retired. I'm on holiday a lot of the time. So my phone number is 714-504-5245.
Wonderful. Well, Rich, thank you for sharing that with our audience. Thank you for the time we had together. I thought it was really informative and instructional, and I know our audience is going to take a lot from it, and appreciate you and Diane being clients of the firm. I really do.
And I thank you for all the great work you've done for our family, Ralph. Thank you.
All righty. Take care now.
The information presented in this program is provided for informational purposes only. The information is believed to be reliable, but no guarantee of accuracy is made or implied. Expressions of opinions are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult a legal or tax professional for specific information regarding your individual situation. This information does not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of capital. Ralph Adamo is registered with the securities and are offered through Kovac Securities, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC, 6451 North Federal Highway, Suite 1201, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33308. Telephone number 954-782-4771. Investment advisory services are offered through Kovac Advisors, Inc. Integrity Wealth Management is not affiliated with Kovac Securities, Inc. or Kovac Advisors, Inc.